Mics are on.
Mics are on, cameras are on, and we are going to restart our Finance Committee meeting. It's open to the public, and now visit item 6, the Land Sale Reserve Policy. And do you have no presentation to make?
Yep, we do not.
Move recommendation. Second.
Recommendation been previously moved, in fact, by the same two councillors who just moved and seconded it now.
Consistency.
Okay.
And the recommendation is that council approve the amended City of Coquitlam Land Sale Reserve Fund.
Yes, we have at least 2 speakers so far, Councillor Asmundson and Councillor Reid.
Well, thank you. I mean, I've talked about this, and there's different policies and different directions on this. I find that by taking this, we're reducing the growth of the fund and how much we're going to need that in the future. I think years ago, when we started this policy by councils previous ago to create this land sale reserve fund that has been well used for borrowing internally, where years ago you had a referendum that went out and failed, but the city had some money at that time to build one asset, which the pool. And so I always worry about reducing this fund because the needs will be greater in the future, and we get a benefit out of this by that internal borrowing and reducing the cost to people and to do all those other projects without having to go to market for market rates on borrowing through that. And our needs on this will grow over the years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Asmundson, and Councillor Reid, and Councillor Wilson.
Ditto, I oppose it.
Ditto, you oppose it? Okay, Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Morrison, and Councillor Hodge.
We didn't want to debate it at all before we moved deferral. Sorry.
Well, because there was a reason you were moving.
Councillor Wilson, please. Thank you.
When discussion in the past took place about whether to use land sale reserve money or not, I believe that time nobody would have seen the type of increases in land values that we have. So my assumption here is that even with this policy, we will still end up most likely, I mean, we can't predict the future, but most likely with more money in the fund than we thought we would have ever had 5 or 10 years ago. Is that a safe assumption to make?
Yeah, that's a reasonably safe assumption. And, should we get to a place that's different, where the inflows to the land sale reserve are not sufficient to provide the safety that council feels is necessary at the time, you can always make another change to the policy to make it be different, should that scenario be different.
Okay, and right now we can borrow from ourselves up to 50% of the value in the land sale reserve fund. So hypothetically, let's say the fund down the road was worth $600 million. We could borrow up to $300 million from that fund. What would we use the other $300 million for?
Well, generally, your land sale reserve fund is there to enable you to invest in land, because the city of Coquitlam has been very, very fortunate. Our residents are fortunate because we've been fairly land wealthy, and so that land is an asset that belongs to the community, and it provides that sort of source of funding in perpetuity, right? So we would use that money to probably buy additional land and make other kind of land decisions that are in the benefit of the city.
And the land that we potentially could buy, though, is in my opinion, my guess is we're running out of options to buy land based not just on the containment boundary, but the agricultural land reserve and mountains and all of that sort of thing. So again, we can't predict the future, but would you foresee a time where we might need $300 million to buy land?
That's a big question. Predicting the future is very difficult. I think that there is always a reason for the city to maintain some level of a land sale reserve, because you don't know what land challenges are going to be out there, and that creates wealth in the long term, so that as you sell land, if at least a portion of it you are putting into reserve and earning interest, you're continuing to create wealth into the future, because you don't know. So you want to, in some ways, land is always an appreciating asset. So you want to make sure for at least a portion of it, you're creating more appreciating asset, and money in an account that earns interest or can be invested for the best benefit of the citizens in the future is an important thing to do to maintain our wealth in the long term. So I can't ever see a time when it would be wise to not have any land sale reserve. That being said, we are generally maintaining 95% of it with this policy. So, you're going a long way to maintaining the wealth and yet meeting that criteria that council put forward that, when Grandpa sells the land, we give a little bit to the community to recognize the use of their land and give them a benefit immediately. So it's a balancing of those two things, wealth in the long term and some benefit immediately for, a really prosperous time.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Marsden, Councillor Hodge, and then me.
Thank you. I think that sums it up very well. I mean, Coquitlam is very fortunate, land wealthy. And that land wealth goes back to the birth of the city 125 years ago when it was determined that when Poco decided they were going to have their own little city, they took the business component and said, oh, you guys just all the land. There's nothing to that. So now we have all this land and the city is certainly benefiting from that now. So past councils absolutely took the right steps in creating the land sale reserve. That's great. It moved and prevented the practice of perhaps just selling land, building something, and it's gone for good. But the intent of it was to put money away for the future and ensure that we were taking care of the future. And this does that. It ensures we stay with the intent of that, because really for those past councils, the future's today. There's needs today. And so as long as we're able to balance out the ongoing anticipated future need and see that reserve continue to grow, while at the same time seeing the residents of today benefit from the past decisions, I think is really what the intent of the reserve was in the first place. So I fully support these. As I said, I think we're in an enviable position that we do have this ability to act today and still keep an eye to the future, which is what the residents are asking us to do. And so if we're able to best manage our resources to deliver services and improvements that are necessary while managing the tax increase on our residents, but still delivering the services, I think it's the appropriate place to be. And I think this has that balance. Recognizing lastly to Councillor Asmunsen's concern with regards to what happens in the future, as we see with the policies we've already amended today, policies are fluid. As the time has changed, as the markets around us change, we have that ability to make those changes and look to the future. So this, I believe, addresses where we need now, protects us into the future, and it is a great first step. And I would really encourage my colleagues to maintain the course and the direction that we gave to staff previously in dialogue. It was direction, it wasn't a vote. This is the formal vote as to what we're going to do. But this direction that we gave them is the basis in which they predicated and built the 2017 budget that we are going to be reviewing over the next few weeks. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'd caution councillors to disclose discussions with staff. Let's just talk about what's happening today. Thank you, Councillor Hodge.
Well, I agree. I think it's a good policy that's been in place. It's served us well for many years. I think it was designed to put money aside for the future, to build reserves for the future. And similar to what Councillor Marsden said, I had made a note and said the needs of today's residents are what past councils were looking towards when they made plans for the future. And so I think today this is the future when you look back at what some of the past decisions were made. I think that putting money away for the future is important. I think that we are seeing at this time large increases in the value of our land holdings, and I think it's time to share some of those profits, if you will, or dividends with today's residents, because there are many needs today, and and those needs and some of the things that this money could be used for will support development in the future. I also note that we are heading into a period, or currently are in a period of unprecedented growth, that we're going to see the infrastructure requirements on this city have to expand and the amenities to expand to meet that growth. We're going to see 100,000 more people in this community in the next 25 years. It took us 125 years to get where we are today, and we're going to double that in just 25 years. And so we're going to have to look at sources of funding. I think it's still important to put money in the bank, buy land, and hold land. I think that's always good. But I think that we're going to have to find a way that we can meet some of today's needs. And this is about a balance. I think it achieves both. It helps us find some funding for those needs that are going to happen today and in the next few years without placing a financial burden on today's taxpayers. So I think this is a good balance, and I'm going to support it.
Thank you. I agree with everything that Councillor Hodge and Marsden have said, and I just want to add, so I won't repeat all those arguments, they're well made. I just want to add that, elaborate on something Councillor Marsden said about this a policy. It just says today we're changing a policy, somebody else can change a policy. I would strongly recommend that every council, so there were 4-year cycles now, about halfway through the council, so the new councillors will have a couple of years to understand how the system works, that this policy be brought forward for just ratification or change. And then that, so right now we're obviously in a very good position. The revenues are growing vastly, and this fund, despite the little nibblings and the crumbs we're going to take off it, will still be growing quite an extent. It may well be that a future council says, gee, we should be taking 10% out of this, and maybe not the, and then none of the interest or something like that, or maybe doubling both or doubling one and keeping the interest. Who knows? But I think this is important enough that this should come to council, every new council, about halfway through the council's term. I don't know if we need. I'm not. I don't want to
take that as direction.
I just
make a note of that.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy thing to do. And
year 2.
Yeah, end of year 2, something like that. So councillors who are just newly elected understand a little more about what's going on. In the first year, it would certainly be way too much. Wouldn't appreciate things. So that's it. Thank you, Mayor Stewart and Councillor Reid.
I think that some of the decisions that council makes have a tremendous effect on what ends up in the land sale reserve. Decisions to build a SkyTrain station, for example, including investing elements of city dollars in beautification of a main corridor, those sorts of things that can increase the value that we get when we sell land. Those are investments that we make, and then the value increase goes into a fund, and the residents don't see that element of increase. Similarly, we are right now buying land outside of a land sale reserve. We're buying land for parks, and we're buying it in areas of Coquitlam where previous councils, for whatever reason, didn't end up with much parkland. Parkland is in short supply in parts of Coquitlam, and we're having to invest today's dollars in order to buy those parcels of land, and it's not included in this calculation. So I'm absolutely comfortable with the idea that 5% of what we do sell for development ends up being able to be used for the priority projects, some of which will be priority projects that will increase the value of other land that will ultimately be sold and proceeds going into the land sale reserve. This is a very, very small element. I wouldn't support much more than this. I support this. I think it's it's the correct balanced point. And I agree entirely with the idea that next council should definitely have another look at this and make sure that they're comfortable with this. And maybe they reduce it, maybe they increase it. In the end, this is about how to make sure the city's assets, the assets owned by the residents of Coquitlam, benefit the residents of Coquitlam in the most sustainable and practical way to serve their needs. And my last comment is that one of the main challenges that we're dealing with as a community and as residents is the high price of land. That challenge affects every resident. Some of them are benefiting from it, but some of them are suffering enormously because of the high price of land and the resulting shortages of housing solutions for residents. So we are, as a city, are having burdens placed on us that we're benefiting from the high price of land when we sell land, but we're not able to invest that benefit immediately in trying to allay some of the challenges created by the high cost of land. So this is a somewhat indirect connection, but it definitely is connectable, and I think this makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. Councillor Reid?
Well, it sounds to me from the last three speakers, but the only money that we're ever going to have to do any development is going to be from this little fund that we're creating, which I don't believe is right. If we go to build some great big giant thing, I'll say a new sports center, we'll probably be taking money out of land sale reserve as maybe using some of the money from this other little fund that we're creating. So we'd be taking money from both, because you won't have enough money in the fund that you're transferring the 5% to ever build some large project. I do not believe. And if you can tell me any different, I would be quite surprised. So if we go to build, you're looking so puzzled, so I'm just listening to what you're saying.
I'm puzzled by, Mr. Chair, I'm puzzled by your use of the word take it out of, because we could borrow it from it. And that's contemplated.
Exactly. So we'll be borrowing from it. So why do we have to take the 5% out in the first place and put it in another fund? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Why don't we just let it all accumulate? If we're going to build something big, we'll just go into land sale reserve, take the whole amount out, and off we go. So I don't see the point in I don't see the point.
I'm not going to allow a back and forth conversation here. Just speak to the issue, okay?
Well, I am speaking to the issue.
Thank you.
A dividend of 5%, I just don't like it, and I think it gives the impression that what I've heard, if I were sitting at home in my chair right now and listening, gives me the impression that the only way we're going to get things built is if we put it in this little fund, and I think Councillor Asmunsen's on the same point, but it's not. This is a little fund it's going to allow us to do some things, but if we wanted to do them, it would be in land sale reserve in the first place, collecting interest. So this doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me. So I'm not supporting it.
Thank you. Any further comment? Councillor Zerilla.
So I'm just going to follow up on what Councillor Reid said. I just had a question. So through the chair to GM Finance, can we not spend the current land sale reserve on the same things that we will be able to spend from the land sale reserve investment fund?
It's up to council to decide what are those priority projects, but right now your land sale reserve is, generally speaking, other than the 5%, is limited to half of it needs to be maintained in the land sale reserve fund to make land related investment.
Right.
The other half can be loaned out with repayment, including interest.
Yeah.
So that maintains the value of your land sale reserve over time. You may invest it in buildings and pay that back, or you may invest it in land, which then builds more opportunity to put money into the land sale reserve in the future. This is just a small component that's coming off to provide for immediate needs right now because we're growing very quickly, and you could use it on, it's up to council to decide what those priority projects are. Given the amount of money that it is, it's going to range depending on what the land sales in the year are. Right now, our estimate for 2016 is it would be $3 million in that range. You can use that for some projects, but that's not going to build you a big building. If you wanted to build a big building or a bigger structure, you would borrow from the general land sale reserve up to the 50%. So if that does in fact grow to be $600 million, that would be in my best day. You could build a building that costs you up to $300 million and repay it with interest over the period of the life of that building. So most of what we've put in place is maintained. It's a 5% adjustment to that.
So the 5% adjustment, the 5% I never really had an issue with. The second point about taking the compoundable interest out, I did have an issue with. But I see the idea that it's basically a discipline issue, that we're going to try to slice off a little piece to make some sort of marketing presentation to the community that this is spendable money, and we're not touching this appreciating asset, which is not even appreciating if we're taking the compound interest out, only going to be appreciating if we sell land. So I have an issue with creating more pots to make it more confusing for our community, but to me the money is still there, so I'm going to go with this. But I just think it's really, it seems to me a little, it seems to me that we're just doing it for discipline reasons as a council, to try to say this is money that we can spend without having to make it look like we're spending or borrowing money. So yeah, I think it's disappointing. I would rather it all stayed in one pot. We'd have access to it in one pot, but it's not like the money's going to disappear.
Thank you. The motion to approve the amended city approve the amended city
Reserve fund
City of
policy.
Coquitlam Land Sale Reserve Policy, written notes over top of it, has been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Carries with Councillor Reid and Councillor Asmussen opposed. And Councillor Stewart has moved, Mayor Stewart has moved adjournment. Councillor Marston has seconded. All in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned.
Thank you.